As New Zealand comes out the end of COVID-related lockdowns and other restrictions, some have been coining this term and this era as a turnover tsunami. And look, job listings are up almost 40% compared to what they were towards the start of 2019 when the pandemic hit. Now, this booming job market is great for employees, particularly those looking for change, but equally it's got some employers quaking in their boots. You see, in a time like this, if companies want to attract and retain talent, many are going to have to work for it. So this begs the question, what can employers do to attract and retain talent in today's day and age? Well, the answer for many lies in workplace policies. So in this podcast, we're going to be discussing a number of more progressive policies and having a think about why some employers should be starting to think about using these policies, and in light of this turnover tsunami, why it might be a good idea. So I'm joined today by Fiona McMillan. Fiona, hi, how's things?
Hi, I'm good, Jack. How are you?
That's good. So Fiona is a partner leading our employment team here at Neave, and as Fiona said, my name's Jack and I'm a solicitor in the employment team. So Fi, off the bat, why are workplace policies good for business?
Yeah, I think there are probably two main reasons, Jack.
Right.
I think historically they've been used as a bit of a tool to attract staff.
Right.
And Jack, I guess we touched on that a little bit when we recorded our pre-employment podcast a little bit earlier on.
Yeah,
but certainly. I think probably one of the main reasons right now is to try and retain the staff that people have got. So that's probably the main reason. And I think more and more employers are actually just going, hey, some of this stuff is actually just really good to do. We just want to be seen to be implementing these types of things.
Yeah, certainly. No, that makes sense. So in light of this, I guess, Fi, I thought it'd be cool to have a bit of a chat about a short list of progressive workplace policies that I've got here, and have a bit of a think about, number one, why employers are implementing these policies, but number two, why they're good for business, and how employers might be able to do so best. So the first policy that I thought would be great to discuss is an employee share scheme. So this employee share schemes are basically an arrangement where shares in the company are given or sold to employees at a discounted price. Now, we've seen a number of employee share schemes kind of start to take a bit more traction in the last couple of years. An example is Contact Energy launched this big employee share scheme that allows staff to acquire $1,000 worth of shares a year. And Port of Tauranga followed suit. They've got a similar scheme where it comes out of employees' wages, so it's deducted from their wages with consent. And this has seen 95% of the employees actually become shareholders in their employers. So, in light of this traction, Fi, from your view, why do you think that employee share schemes are so popular?
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, Jack, that you give those examples, because I think historically, I think people have thought employee share schemes are just for kind of new start-up employers, so new employers who perhaps can't pay market rates to their staff because they're new and they're starting up, but they want to give employees something extra for being a part of their journey from the outset. So I think that's historically where employee share schemes have come in, but we are starting to see more and more quite established organisations implement employee share schemes, and there are a few good reasons why you might look to have them. There's some quite clear evidence that it creates a higher level of employee commitment. People really feel like they are a part of the company.
Certainly.
I think it can also at times increase retention as well, because people want to wait until their shares are at a certain level before they depart. And sometimes it can be a little bit more cost effective for employers if they don't have the cash sitting there to give bonuses, or as I said in the startup example, where the company's not in a position to pay people market rates.
Yeah, no, certainly that makes sense. And as you've said about kind of, it's a little bit of a change with these more progressive employee share schemes. It's kind of no longer are the days where it's just the C-suite, these top executives getting the chance to buy into the companies. It's everyone from top to bottom and left to right. And I guess you've seen that with the likes of Port of Tauronga's scheme and the uptake there.
100%.
So, look, in terms of these benefits, on the flip side, what should employers look out for, or what considerations are there for employers looking to implement a scheme like this?
Yeah, and look, I guess where the employment team comes in here at Neave, we traditionally work with our corporate team on these schemes to make
Certainly.
Sure that they're right from an employment law perspective and a corporate perspective. I guess some downsides, some things for employers to consider is sometimes there can be quite large setup costs with employee share schemes and the ongoing administration of them. So I think you need to be aware of those costs before launching into it.
Certainly.
There are tax implications as well that Jack and I can tell you many things, but tax implications is not one of them.
Certainly, I'm here on that.
So often
I pay my own taxes, and that's as far as I get.
That's enough, Jack.
Yeah.
So as well as working with our corporate team on these schemes, sometimes we're working with accountants as well to get these right. But I guess where we come in is assisting to bring these share schemes into employment agreements and policies. The other thing I guess you've got to turn your mind to is consulting with your staff about them. So often employee share schemes are optional. Employees don't have to opt into them. But if you're bringing one into play in order to retain staff and attract staff, why not have a chat to your staff about what would be of interest to them before you, I guess, try and create something and spend money creating it? So there can be some downsides there. They do create some work, but once our clients have done that work, they only talk about the benefits of them. So it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, certainly, and as we've seen, there's a lot of different ways to implement it, so it makes sense to implement it in a way that's actually going to align with what employees want. Otherwise, to a degree, what's the point?
100%.
Look, the next policy that I want to discuss is slightly more taboo, but by no means does that mean we shouldn't be talking about it, and that's menopause policies. So special counsel on our team, Gwen Jewett, recently penned an article on this topic exactly, and discussed the concerning number of employers that actually fail to recognise how menopause can affect an employee's ability to perform their job. And in Gwen's article, she aptly recognised that this is something around 50% of employees are going to face at some point in their lives. And so because of that, it's actually high time employers formally recognise the effects of menopause on an employee's ability to do their job. So Fee, I guess from a practical sense, what are the potential repercussions in the workplace of a lack of adequate support for those going through menopause?
Yeah, and look, I'll have to be honest here. It wasn't really until I read Gwen's article that I actually got a true understanding of this issue. And I guess from Gwen's article, I then started to look at other things online, and I perhaps felt a little bit embarrassed and naive about actually how much of a workplace issue that this is. But
certainly,
from reading Gwen's article, from the other reading I've done, I guess the issues that an employer might try and remedy with such a policy are things around perhaps low morale. Women going through menopause might have reduced performance or productivity or absenteeism. It might create poor working relationships or conflicts with others. And I think the worst possible outcome is that a woman goes, actually, it's too hard working through this as well as working, so I'm going to leave. So I guess that the flow-on effects of menopause in the workplace are perhaps a lot bigger than many of us thought.
Yeah, certainly. And I know that's a discussion I'd had with Gwen, that when she was, drafting this article and doing her own research on this topic, that actually she found that there's no government resources provided by the New Zealand government on how menopause affects employees as well. So you're so right. It's a new area to be talked about, but rightly so. So in terms of those are obviously the effects of the effects that a lack of support can have on employees. If a policy were to be put in place that provided for support for menopause, what do you think that support would look like, Fee?
Yeah, and look, I guess as we start to see these policies come into workplaces, they're taking lots of different shapes and forms, but I guess
certainly
some of the things that these policies are touching on are what support can be provided to employees.
Yes.
Talk about flexible working arrangements, a special form of leave if someone is needing some time out of the office, so not necessarily dipping into their sick leave or annual leave, a special allotment of leave. But there's also some really practical things around if it's a workplace which requires uniforms, can some better fitted or more relaxed uniforms be appropriate? Rest areas for those who need it, things like temperature control in the workplaces as well. So yes, there are some really kind of high-level things such as flexible working and leave, etc., but there are also some quite low-level things that a workplace could look to implement as well.
Yeah, certainly. That's really helpful. So in terms of that rationale for a policy like a menopause policy, do you think there's also scope for policies that deal with things like menstruation?
Yeah, so once again, I think this is something that employers have been quite slow to provide support around, and I think I think women who are having issues traditionally are required to take their sick leave or annual leave. So look, once again, I guess there is scope for a special policy, but we're actually probably seeing work around that even less so than the menopause policy. I think it's probably another thing for employers' to-do lists.
Yeah, definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense. So in light of this discussion about I guess providing employees with additional leave, like you've talked about in circumstances, perhaps providing for additional leave in circumstances like employees suffering from the effects of menopause or the effects of menstruation, it got me thinking about a third type of policy, which is these additional leave policies more broadly. And historically under New Zealand law, I guess employees have had very definitive set types of leave, and we all know what they are, and we all like to know how many we've got of each left. But we're seeing a real rise of employers, introducing some more progressive leave allocations to do with some things that go beyond an employee's statutory entitlement. One I saw recently was an Australian real estate company fee which had introduced grandparent leave. So an employee who had just become a grandparent could take some time off to spend with their grandchild and to be a part of kind of supporting that time around their birth. Now, for context fee, I have around 30 cousins. So as soon as I kind of heard about this policy, I immediately thought that my grandparents really could have milked that if that was back in the day. And perhaps fortunately for their employer, I don't think my grandma had that policy at the company she worked for. But it got me thinking about the conversation. What other progressive policies have you seen that have worked or haven't worked or otherwise?
Oh, look, I think we should just stop at grandparent leave. That's just like the nicest thing I've ever heard.
It's a heartwarming one, isn't it?
Oh, it's a really lovely one. But look, you're completely right, Jack. We've seen a real range from our clients over the years. I guess one that always sticks out to me is the warehouse has always spoken about their birthday leave. So if you work at the warehouse, you get your birthday off paid, which I've always loved. And I wonder, Jack, if I go rogue on this podcast and announce that Neave's going to do that, or do you think I'll have a few grumpy partners on my hands?
Oh, they'll just have to commit fee. I don't see anything else happening.
But look, jokes aside, we see lots of different types of leave. Quite a few companies have implemented a certain amount of days of mental health leave. Right. And that is essentially, you can just call in and you don't have to say what's wrong. You can just say, hey, I'm not coming to work today. And I guess that's a reflection of the fact that even people with really good mental health and have a good support system around them, sometimes we all have days where we don't want to be at work. So we're seeing an increase of that. I think there's been the more traditional ones around things like marriage leave, but I would suggest that's a little bit archaic now. Some other cooler ones, like I've seen, is around volunteering leave, so people can take some time off work to volunteer at a charity of their choosing. The other one, Jack, well, I know when we were preparing for this and talking, you called it paternity leave.
I just thought the name in itself was so good.
So it is good, I'll give you that. So that's, I guess, leave when you've got a new pet join your family, or the other end of the spectrum. If you've had a pet pass away, you might want to take a period of leave. So look, there's a whole range, but I guess you've just got to consider, I guess, practically A, what your company can afford, and B, the types of leave where you think you're going to get the most traction from your team, from your staff.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because it's all very well having leave that provides for certain things, but if your employees don't want that, or that doesn't apply to them, then I guess how useful is it? And I guess that segues well into my next question, which would be, in light of companies coming up with a lot of different types of more creative leave, if you will, is there risk of employees feeling or claiming disparity of treatment in terms of, like you talked about marriage leave? Oh, well, I don't have a fiance, or I can't afford a wedding, but this person can, so they get an extra day off. You know, there's definitely a bit of easy to see how there could be tension there.
Yeah, look, 100%, and sometimes you can have the best intentions with something, and there can be kind of negative flow-on effects. Right. One option is, I guess, to you can provide people with a pool of extra leave. So it might be an extra 5 days. And you can say to people, you can use that for something that's important to you. So you might have a wedding coming up, you might be having a puppy joining your family, you might want to volunteer at Starship Hospital for a week. We want to give you 5 days to do something that's special for you and important for you. So that could be, I guess, a way to get around that issue.
Yeah, certainly.
I guess you've got to accept that a lot of people will just add it to their annual leave pool and will take longer holidays, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either.
No, yeah, fair enough. If that's what they need, then that might be what they need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, wonderful. That's really helpful. So I guess the last policy that I wanted to discuss, and this one's very topical in light of, as we talked about at the start, about coming out of these COVID-related restrictions, is flexible working policies. And employers have naturally been encouraging staff to return to the workplace in light of easing restrictions. But would it be fair to say there's an appetite from some employees to continue working from home?
Yeah, and I guess just a bit of a heads up. Alex Beale and I are going to be recording a podcast at another stage that talks a little bit more, I guess, in depth around working from home. But this is I think this is a really good time to talk about flexible working policies. And I guess to come back to your question, Jack, you're completely right. These conversations are starting to happen at the moment as we, I guess, the restrictions in red are starting to be loosened, and in time will move to orange, which is going to result in more people returning to the workplace. And this is where these conversations around working from home or some type of hybrid arrangement are coming about.
Yeah, certainly. No, that makes lots of sense. Very topical. So in light of that, what does a good flexible working policy look like?
Yeah, and I think essentially flexible working policies can look the way that you want them to look. So I guess the starting point is people can, under the legislation, make a request to work flexibly. And once again, Alex and I will talk about that in a little bit more detail in another podcast. Certainly. But flexibility, I think there's this misconception that flexible working is part-time. That's not necessarily the case. Flexible working is around where people work, it's around when they work, it's around if they can split their day. They might work for a few hours in the morning, do some jobs middle of the day, and then work later on that night. So I guess the big takeaway is this can look the way you want.
Certainly.
We've seen some pretty extreme examples. We've seen Perpetual Guardian move to a 4-day week, which I think when they first announced it, we all thought was pretty wild and extreme, but the term 4-day week, we throw it around now. It's becoming more and more common. So we're seeing 4-day weeks, but we're also, I guess, the lower end of the spectrum. We're seeing people who traditionally have worked in an office 5 days a week are now working from home a couple of days a week and in the office 3 days a week. So I guess when you are drafting your policy, just be really open to what all the options could be in people's individual circumstances.
Yeah, certainly. So obviously there's a number of benefits, as we've just discussed, to employees, and that flows into kind of attracting good employees and retaining them. But what are some things to be wary of when putting in place allowing for flexible working arrangements?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of big ones for me. I think the first is you don't want it to be so flexible that people are no longer connected to their workplace and their colleagues.
Certainly.
So I know one employer I work with, they have a policy of, work from home, work from the office, we don't care, but you need to be in the office X amount of times a month, just to remain, keep that connection happening.
Yep.
So that's probably the biggest thing. And the second one I'd probably note as well is I think a misconception in this area is, well, if employees are working from home, I'm not responsible for their health and safety. That's not the case at all. You are just as responsible for someone, whether they are working in the office, out in the field meeting with a client, or they're working from home. So your health and safety obligations remain the same.
Yeah, certainly. No, that's really helpful. So in terms of making sure a policy is implemented properly, are there some practical steps that you can think of to make sure that it's done well and considered properly so it will have the best effect?
Yeah, and I think, Jack, probably my comments here can be applied to all the policies that we've talked about today. So
right.
I think you want to consult with your staff about what's going to be in the policy.
Certainly.
I think you want to have a regular review date in that policy, because a policy, I guess, that you create today might be completely irrelevant or completely redundant in your business in 3 years' time.
Yeah, certainly.
But the other thing that I guess I want to leave on is if you're not sure that a new policy is going to work for you as the employer or your employees, don't be afraid to implement something and trial it for 6 months.
Yeah, great.
See how it works for everyone and then look to relook at the policy at that stage. So don't think that that when you implement a policy you're stuck with it for life. It's not the case at all.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really helpful. Well, thank you for your time, Fiona. It's quite clear from what we've discussed today that the diverse kind of needs and the values of the employees that make up our workforce in light of that, there's certainly no shortage of different types of workplace policies that can be put in place to attract and retain good staff. And as you've discussed, while not all policies are going to work for every workplace, it's about, as you said, consulting and figuring out what employees want and what they actually need to retain talent in that respective industry for that employer. And finally, from what kind of, I guess, we've discussed, it's clear that businesses can't kind of curb the defection of talent with money alone, but it actually needs to be thoughtful, and there's a lot of practical things that don't necessarily cost money that might equally result in a really kind of positive and welcoming workplace for those employees. So look, we provide lots of advice here at Neave to employers and draft a number of policies for employers that are progressive and help them, retain and attract really good talent. And look, we'd be happy to do the same for you. So look, myself and Fiona's contact details can be found below. But yeah, as I said, Fee, thank you for your time, and thank you for tuning in.